mind blindness, emotions blindness, and executive function deficits all create the biggest problem, which is anxiety. If I'm not sure what other people might be thinking and why they behave certain ways, and if I don't understand what other people might be feeling and why, and I have a lot of these executive function deficits, the emotional dysregulation and memory problems and attention problems and so on, creates a lot of anxiety and unpredictability. He has a ton of unpredictability in his life. He's probably never even used that term for you. His life is full of unpredictability. What does somebody do when they're dodging paintballs all day? They try to come up with as much predictability as they can. What does that look like? They have to have routine, structure, rules. They don't like change. They especially don't like surprise change. And how does that download to the NT? That he's very rigid, self-absorbed, one-track mind, opinionated, stubborn. So our big goal in this group, the overarching issue that we're going to directly and indirectly try to address, is how to reduce his anxiety, which will in turn reduce some of your anxiety. Because as long as your message raises his anxiety, you're screwed. Whenever you try to problem solve with him when his anxiety comes up, be a lot less painful and time consuming to just go beat your head against a brick wall. This isn't micromanaging. This isn't turning you into a mom. This doesn't mean that you have to do a bunch of that. All the relationship work is on your shoulders. It's really a simple formula. Your mantra has to become effective immediately. How can I, and we'll discuss in depth exactly how to do this. What can I say or do or avoid saying or doing such that A, we can actually start working on problems, and B, I don't raise his anxiety, because as soon as his anxiety comes up, all bets are off, and you're wasting your time again. A lot of the NTs, especially the older ones that I run into, they go, we don't even talk about problems anymore. Well, they just pile up in the closet there. I just don't even bring anything up anymore because it just ends in a shit show and don't get anywhere. And then now the only thing I get accomplished is our resentment gets more entrenched. And he just wants to isolate more because now I'm his number one source of anxiety. So his big goal of the day is try to avoid me. The biggest problem by far is the anxiety issue. And there's multiple ways to attack that, but it's going to be very individualized. What's going to work for Donnie may backfire for Megan, so we will need to kind of tailor it to the specific situation, because if you've met one guy with ASD level 1, you've only met one guy with ASD level 1. Because there's so much variability amongst individuals on the spectrum that there's never going to be a one-size-fits-all. Hey guys, this is Mark, and I often get questions from usually neurotypical wives asking, is there any way that my husband can possibly learn some relationship skills and or develop some emotional literacy in the context of this neurodiverse marriage? And the answer is yes. Yes. Even he can learn some relationship skills and develop some emotional literacy. Is he ever going to be neurotypical? No. Is he ever going to match your emotional intelligence and social intelligence way up here? No, but we can make one heck of an improvement. And so I have a men's Q&A group, and once they do that, they can move on to the ASD Men's Masterclass. So I have two groups. The first one is all Q&A. It's ASD men only, online using Skype. Once they complete the Q&A group, then they can go on to the ASD Men's Masterclass. The Q&A group is only 4 weeks long. The Masterclass is 6 weeks long. The links will be both in the comment section and in the description area below this video. So get that man to sign up, and I want to see him soon. Time's a-wasting. So we need to find hope somewhere. We need to find some hope somewhere so that it's not just constant disappointment. You've been let down, you've been disappointed. There's probably been times when you had your hopes up because he did well for a while, but it didn't last very long. And then, oh man, I'm not even going to get my hopes up anymore. We want to find a little piece of hope somewhere, and there's always going to be something somewhere. I'm going to come up with an example that one of the other NT ladies came up with. If you can find something that consistently works in dealing with him, you found one thing that you know that every time I say or do this, it usually works out pretty well. Or maybe there's something that if I make sure I don't say or do this thing, it usually works out pretty well. So now there's hope, because I know that given this, at least in this one little domain, I know that I can have some success. And then once you have success in that little tiny area, statistically speaking, you should be able to find a second area somewhere, and then you can start scaling up. So I'm going to give you an example that'll help you make sense of this. We had an NT wife, and she said, every time I want to do something that he views as a radical change, when we're going to talk about a vacation or maybe purchase a nice used car or any kind of thing that gets outside of his structure, he's very uncooperative. Sometimes will just refuse flat out to even do it. So I had a little conversation with her that I'm going to have with you now, that people with ASD are slow processors. You can be very intuitive, very spontaneous. You can pretty much view a situation and gather enough data in your head to where you don't have to deliberate on it for months. He is like a slow 20-year-old computer with hardly any memory space, and you fire it up and it takes forever to come on, and then you try to open the window and the little thing spins around forever before the window opens up. He is exactly like that, exactly like that. He has to have time to process, sometimes as much as 24 hours. So this NT wife usually would present something to him. He would have some reservations. She would download that as he doesn't care, which I'm not faulting her. But then she would get a little pushy, which raised his anxiety. So now he not only had some reservations, but he went the next level, which he just flat out refused to do it. And she downloaded that as he's narcissistic. Now that she knows that he's a slow processor, and she wrote me a big long email about this. I'm giving you the summary. She goes, now when I have an important decision that I want his input or cooperation with, I put it out there and then I leave it alone. I don't touch it. I don't even mention it again. And after he's slept on it, thought about it, ruminated about it, he almost always will come back and go, yeah, I think I could do that. That's probably a pretty good idea. And so she totally flipped that thing around 180 degrees. She realized his slow processing has nothing to do with him being obstinate, uncooperative, neglectful, whatever other terms you might use. He had to have some time to think about it. And so that was her little piece of hope. She knew that 9 times out of 10, if she planted the seed and then kept her mouth shut and let him think about it, 9 times out of 10, he would be okay with it. And that was that one little piece of hope. But then she found another little niche that worked, another little key that worked in that particular lock. And so now she kind of got out of this rabbit hole of negativity bias and slowly got to the point where she's pretty disciplined and was more focusing on the positives. There certainly was negatives, but she wouldn't hyper-focus on those so much. She would find those little tiny moments of success and provide him with some acknowledgement and praise, which was very reinforcing for him. Your husband, he would love to be out of the doghouse. And when you just offer a few words of appreciation or, hey, I appreciate the fact that you did this, very reinforcing for him, because he's used to always doing things wrong. He's used to always messing up. It feels like he never lives up to your expectations. And he's probably has even got to the point where it doesn't matter what I say or do, it's never going to be good enough, so he's quit trying. So this would be a way to kind of turn that. That doesn't mean I don't love you. That doesn't mean I don't appreciate how you feel, even though I may not understand it. I appreciate the fact that you have feelings. I value my marriage. I love you. I'm working on keeping this marriage together, and I want to make you happy. So don't make me out to be an assassin just because I don't understand your feelings. A tactful line would be, I have difficulty understanding other people's emotions. I know that makes me look like an insensitive bastard. I don't do that intentionally. That's how I'm wired. I'm not trying to make excuses. If I could do better, believe me, I would have done it a long time ago. But that doesn't mean that I don't love you or understand that you have feelings. And it doesn't mean that I don't care about your feelings. I may not understand them, but I don't have to understand them to care about them. You're reframing it as, even though I have this blind spot, that doesn't change my love for you, or the fact that I want to make you happy, or that I care about your feelings. I can care about your feelings and not totally understand them. Well, first of all, I want to make the distinction between ignoring and avoiding. I've used the term avoid. Ignoring, to me, you may have a different version of ignore, which is fine, but ignoring implies to me anyway that I'm just pretend that didn't happen, and I'm supposed to pretend like I don't have any thoughts or feelings about it. That's so. If you would share that definition of ignoring with me, I don't want you to ignore it. I want you to avoid doing the negatives. In other words, trying to deal with that issue when the bullet's already left that gun. He's already had, we'll use the aggressive tone. I'm sure if he were here, he would say, no, it wasn't aggressive, but she downloaded it that way, so it may as well be aggressive. So if he's had an aggressive tone, that bullet's already left the gun. And what some people do, NT ladies do, they want to intervene, which just makes a bad problem worse. So in that case, you wouldn't necessarily want to ignore it. You would want to avoid addressing it then with the afterthought that I do want to address it later. So that's avoiding saying or doing anything in the moment to make it worse. So in this scenario, if this happened with her, aggressive tone from him, she avoids saying or doing anything in that moment, if possible. Sometimes this isn't possible, especially if there's an emergent issue that needs to be dealt with right then. But the other 95% of the time, you can just put that thing on hold. It's not uncommon when she is upset. In fact, it's very common for her when she is upset to start interrogating and bombshelling you with a bunch of questions. And when she does that, you have laid your own trap. So this is for Stephanie and all the other ladies that might be listening. When you're upset and you start launching questions, you have just set your own trap. A barrage of questions is an attack. Listen, ladies, I'm talking to the ladies, even though the men are the only one hearing me in this moment. A barrage of questions is an attack. He's going to instantly feel anxious and instantly get in defense mode. If she's anxious, that's when she needs to not be asking questions. She needs to go calm down, whether we're talking about anxiety or anger, either one. She needs to go calm down, and then she needs to come back with one or two questions. Even if she's calm and she gets in interrogation mode, it's still going to have the same net result of your anxiety coming up. Your brain's going to short circuit. You're only going to be able to listen to about 80% of what she says. You're only going to understand 60% of that. You're only going to retain 40% of that. You're only going to implement 20% of that. She's getting hardly any return on her investment of time and energy if she's coming at you with a bunch of questions while she's anxious and or angry.
So what I run into a lot is this situation where the man, in this case, we'll use the ASD man and the NT wife as the example, he is literally afraid of his NT wife at this point when the conflict has gone on for years unresolved. And this usually starts out by she, the NT wife, has not experienced the degree of emotional reciprocity that she wants and needs and desires. A lot of her expectations are not being met. This goes on for quite a few years. With good intention, she tries to reconcile differences, trying to make the relationship work, trying to fix some broken pieces. And her good faith effort usually downloads in his mind, the ASD man, as complaining, criticism, being parental, constantly correcting him. And so now he feels like he's on thin ice all the time, like he's in the doghouse much of the week. And I have heard so many self-reports from these men that they honestly are afraid to say much or do much because they just assume that they're going to get in trouble. And so they tend to basically go into shy mode. And this could look like he's spending less time with you. He doesn't really want to engage conversation with you. He may view you as his major source of anxiety. He tends to be preoccupied with other things. And that downloads in the NT wife's mind as he doesn't care about the relationship. I'm not important to him and so on. But in many cases, what's really going on, he is just trying to avoid drama and conflict and arguments. He doesn't feel like he can win. And at some level, he's given up hope because he's, in his mind anyway, he has tried numerous things, none of which seem to help anything. And these men will say this a lot. It doesn't matter what I say or do, it's never good enough. And they are literally afraid, and I'm not exaggerating, they are constantly overly concerned, for good reason in their mind, that it's better to say nothing at this point, because when I try to fix it, oftentimes it makes a bad problem worse. And they're basically in a form of flight. And you may notice as an NT wife that sometimes he flips to the other side of that spectrum and goes into fight, which would be the meltdown, adult temper tantrum, and so on, and then flips back to the shutdown. So the moral to the story then is we need to come up with a communication strategy such that the NT wife can get her point across. In this case, the point being I need to get some of my needs met, without that downloading in his brain as I'm being attacked yet again. And so I really need to protect myself, and how I protect myself is to disconnect.
His anxiety is so high that he doesn't even want to have even the beginning of a conversation. So trust has been broken. He doesn't trust having conversations with you now. And so that's why you can't even get to first base with him. I would encourage you to do an apology to him. This is really going out on a limb here, asking you to apologize to him. I think you should apologize to him and say, listen, I have come at you in ways that raised your anxiety. And now I believe that you don't even trust having difficult conversations with me because you're afraid that it's going to end in a shit show like it has so many times before. But I'm doing this ladies group. I have new methods here. I'm committed to doing them consistently. And I would appreciate it if you give me a second chance at working with you so we could work together to deal with some of this complicated stuff that goes unresolved. And I want to apologize for raising your anxiety such that you can't even listen to one sentence come out of my mouth now without being triggered.
Got a question here from a neurotypical wife regarding her alleged autistic husband. And she asks, does ASD come and go? I have a husband of 5 years, tentatively diagnosed with this disorder, but while he's always special, there are weeks when it's like a switch is turned on and everything turns bad. These are the times when I struggle to enjoy him as a person. His resilience becomes very low. He argues with everything I say. But then after a week or so, the switch goes again and he's back to his usual, fairly lovable self with a few quirks. Is this normal? The short answer is yes. It's normal for people on the autism spectrum to experience periodic anxiety and have a limited ability to soothe themselves. So that's kind of a double whammy there. They're very vulnerable to anxiety, but yet outside of spending a lot of time with their special interest outside of the relationship, they have a hard time dissipating that anxiety. And this vulnerability is an intrinsic feature of ASD through specific neurotransmitter system defects, a breakdown in circuitry related to extinguishing fear responses, or a secondary consequence of their inability to make proper social judgments in time of social stress. In a nutshell, the more anxious your husband is, the more he will act out his emotions rather than using more functional methods of discharging the negative energy associated with anxiety. And this results in the problematic behavior that you have been witnessing. Now, on a side note that may or may not be applicable to your unique situation, if you're noticing that this switch, as you call it, that gets turned on and everything turns bad, if there's nothing going on at home that you can identify that causes this switch, it's very possible that something could be going on at work. Perhaps his boss is being demanding. Perhaps he's not getting along with a coworker. Perhaps there are deadlines to be met and he's struggling to keep up with the pace. Could be a host of different things. And so he's trying to hold it together through the day. Then when he gets home, unfortunately, it's possible that you become the target of misplaced anger and anxiety reduction. So it would be good to ask him if there's anything going on at work that could be causing stress that manifests in behavioral problems when he gets home. It's not unlike a child on the autism spectrum who goes to school, masks all day, tries to hold his shit together the best that he can. Then when he gets home, he's exhausted and stressed, but he feels comfortable at home. He feels comfortable showing his dark side or his ugly side to his parents. So he acts out at a high level at home, but then contains himself when he goes back to school the next day, and you get into this cycle. So it would be worth investigating to see if your husband is experiencing anxiety outside of the relationship.
When the two of you are arguing, the two of you are going at it, and it almost looks like it's an equal battle. Who's winning and who's losing? He's winning because as he's over there displaying his anger, that he is fully engaged in anxiety reduction. That was the whole reason he got wound up to begin with. He got anxious, game on. He's over there running his mouth. He is actually in the process of alleviating his anxiety. He's discharging this negative pent-up anxiety. She's over there getting more anxious. So when you are arguing with him and the two of you are going at it, he is discharging negative energy while you're building negative energy. Mm-hmm. You lose. And then you're the one to not forget this the next day, the next week, the next month. You remember shit from 5 years ago. He can't even remember something from yesterday. He will blow up, have his meltdown 5 minutes later. He's fine. You're not. If he blew up in front of you and the kids, the whole family's traumatized for a week, he's perfectly fine. You lose.
So why does your partner with ASD level 1 seem to prefer spending more time with a special interest than with you, the neurotypical spouse? Well, for all people with Asperger's or high-functioning autism, life is divided into two categories, preferred and non-preferred activities. Preferred activities are those things your spouse engages in frequently and with great intensity. However, not all of his preferred activities are equal. Some are much more highly desired. An activity that is lower on the list can hardly be used as a motivator for one that is higher. For example, you, the NT spouse, will have great difficulty getting him to substitute his computer time by offering a social reward. For example, accompanying you to a family get-together. If the computer is higher on his list, an activity that is non-preferred will often be avoided as long as possible. For example, doing chores, going to the grocery, watching a boring movie with you, and so on. The lower the activities are on the list of desirability, the more he will resist and avoid doing them. Now, sometimes an activity becomes non-preferred because it competes with one that is much more highly valued. For example, going for a walk with you could be enjoyable, but if he is reading at the moment and reading is higher on his list, he will not likely stop what he's doing to go with an impromptu walk. Most often, preferred and non-preferred activities are problem areas in the relationship. Your autistic spouse will always want to engage in preferred activities even when you have something more important for him to do. For example, watching the kids while you run an errand. He does not want to end preferred activities, and your attempts to have him end them will likely cause conflict. If many non-preferred elements are combined together, the problem can be a freaking nightmare. For example, going shopping with you, then stop by to see his mother-in-law, then back home so he can fix the water leak under the kitchen sink, and so on. Also, family vacations where his routine is totally disrupted for a rather lengthy period of time can also be a nightmare. The person on the autism spectrum rarely has activities he just likes. He tends to either love or hate an activity. The middle ground is usually missing. Now, obviously, you would like your spouse with ASD to experience new things to see if he likes them. But he may not want to do this just because you're asking him to do something new. People on the autism spectrum usually hate change. They usually hate deviations from their routine. He already has his list of preferred activities and will rarely see the need for anything new. Now, I know that this is not such great news because the autistic spouse who's engaging in his special interest to the exclusion of all else is emotionally unavailable much of the time. Many neurotypical spouses assume that the emotionally unavailable autistic spouse chooses to reject intimacy because he has fallen out of love. This is not the case. Remaining emotionally distant is rarely a choice. It's more like a case of social ignorance disease, which is also called mind blindness, that often operates at a subconscious level. And I'm going to use an analogy of speaking a foreign language, and I'm just going to pick one off the top of my head. Let's go with Vietnamese. So I want you to imagine that you have been dropped off in Vietnam and you have no idea how to speak Vietnamese. That language is total foreign territory for you. Somebody comes up to you speaking Vietnamese, and you have no idea what they're saying. You don't know how to respond. And so you just kind of give them the blank stare, and they continue to talk, and you continue to respectfully listen, even though you're not absorbing anything. As the minutes unfold, this person realizes that you're not understanding him. And so he gets agitated with you because he thinks you're not paying attention, or that you're not getting it when you should be getting it. And now he's getting angry, saying the same thing over and over and over, waiting for the proper response from you in Vietnamese, but you can't deliver. And it gets to the point now where this person is absolutely outraged that you're not responding to him. What would you do? You would probably do one of three things. You would either nod your head and give some indication that you understand, but of course you don't. Or you would get so annoyed with the fact that he's annoyed with you that you would probably go off on him, maybe even cuss him out in English to get him to back off. Or in a state of embarrassment, you would leave and try to get away from that person because you cannot speak Vietnamese and this person is agitated. That's what's going on with your autistic husband. You're speaking emotionese, he doesn't get it. But you think he should be able to get it. And so you keep pushing and pressing and getting louder and longer in your dialogue. And the more he doesn't get it, the angrier you get. And then he either nods his head to give you the indication that he's getting it when he's not, or he does a version of a meltdown to get you to back off and now he gets aggressive. Or he does a shutdown and leaves because he knows he's never going to get it, so he goes and hides somewhere for hours, if not days. You don't speak Vietnamese unless you're from Vietnam. He doesn't speak emotionese. Why would you want to continue to frustrate him, to get him to understand how you feel, to get him to know what he's supposed to do based on how you feel? Doesn't make sense. So instead of speaking to him in emotionese, you need to speak to him in need-ese. Speak in terms of needs, not emotions. That would be very helpful to him in the same way that this person from Vietnam would recognize, oh, this is a foreigner who doesn't speak Vietnamese. I know some English, I'll speak to this person in English. Now he's speaking to you in a language you understand. If your husband is on the autism spectrum, he is alexithymic, which means he doesn't understand emotions. He's not in tune with his emotions or your emotions. He doesn't speak emotionese. Your autistic husband, let's say, for example, says something or does something that's hurtful. Okay, that's step number one. And let's say that in this scenario that I'm painting, step number two is you want to talk to him about how that hurts your feelings. We'll call that step number two. And you try to reason with him or emotionalize with him so that he will understand that his behavior resulted in pain for you. So basically you're trying to instill some appropriate, healthy guilt in him. That's the whole point of you saying, hey, what you said or did there was hurtful, and you want to talk about your feelings. And your motivation for that is you want to instill some healthy guilt in him. You want that to stimulate some emotion in him, in this case, the emotion of guilt. Why would you want to do that? Well, your primary motivation isn't to guilt trip him in the form of revenge. Your primary motivation is if he feels a healthy sense of guilt about what he has said or done that resulted in my pain, he will change his behavior, right? So that's the last step in the progression here. Unfortunately, you're talking to somebody who's out of touch with his emotions and your emotions. It's called alexithymia. So your method fails, and has failed how many times now? Hundreds? So here's the progression again. He says or does something that's hurtful. You try to articulate to him that it was hurtful. You're appealing to his emotions, in this case, healthy guilt, in hopes that he will change behavior, but your message gets lost. You would get it if you had a female friend that you unintentionally did something or said something that was hurtful to her, and she would talk to you about how that felt. You would instantly feel a sense of guilt, and you would want to change your behavior accordingly. So it's not that your husband doesn't want to change his behavior. It's that he doesn't get the connection between the healthy guilt and the behavioral change. There is no healthy guilt trigger to motivate him to change behavior. And you download that as he doesn't give a shit. No, he does. It's that he doesn't feel that healthy sense of guilt about behavior, so therefore there's no motivation to change behavior. That's why I preach it's best to speak in terms of needs rather than feelings. Think of your autistic spouse's behavior as an iceberg. The behavior you're actually seeing is the tip of the iceberg, but there's a lot more going on under the surface. People on the autism spectrum can't always express their feelings through facial expressions, body language, or even speech. Instead, they may be expressed through other behaviors. Your spouse might be trying to tell you that he's tired, stressed, annoyed by something that happened earlier, or in need of some time alone. So don't simply assume that when he is acting out, so to speak, it's tied to him purposely being insensitive, uncaring, selfish, etc. Sometimes there will be a connection between the two, most of the times not. There is a range of reasons why people on the autism spectrum have difficulties with behavior. The world can be a confusing, isolating, and daunting place for your spouse, and it is his fundamental difficulties with communication and social interaction that are often the root cause of what you might view as difficult behavior. People on the autism spectrum can find it difficult to cope with change, whether a temporary change due to their timetable at work, or a more permanent change, such as moving to a different city. You may find that your spouse's behavior alters at times of change, but settles as he becomes used to a new environment or routine. Communication difficulties can impact on how people on the autism spectrum deal with social interactions. They may find social situations very demanding or stressful because they have to work hard to communicate with other people. These individuals often don't understand that other people hold different views from theirs. This may also make social interactions difficult. People on the autism spectrum may not understand social rules, which are unwritten rules that govern social situations, such as how close to stand to other people or how to take a turn in conversation. This is especially true if they find themselves in a new, unfamiliar situation. Therefore, social situations can be daunting and unpredictable. Some may engage in a particular behavior to try and avoid social contact. Many people on the spectrum have difficulties processing sensory information. For example, they may not be able to manage some tastes or food textures, or find that someone touching them, even lightly, is uncomfortable. Certain smells, lights, or sounds can be distressing. Some may find it difficult to block out background noise and what they experience as excessive visual information. Instead, sounds, lights, and other sights are all processed at the same level of intensity and lead to sensory overload. You may find that your spouse starts a repetitive behavior in stressful environments to try and block out external sensory information. These individuals can be very sensitive to subtle changes in their environment. If there's a sudden change in behavior, think about whether there has been recent change in the environment. People on the spectrum experience a number of difficulties with communication. For example, understanding what's being said to them, which is receptive language, understanding nonverbal communication, for example, facial expressions, body language, and communicating with others, which would be expressive language. Because of these difficulties, they can find it hard to communicate their needs or to understand what other people are saying to them or asking them to do, and this can cause considerable frustration and anxiety, which, if it can't be expressed any other way, may result in challenging behavior. People on the autism spectrum also can find sequencing very difficult, which is putting what is going to happen in a day in a logical order in their mind. They need to have timetables so they can see what's going to happen, when it's going to happen, and plan for it. However, unstructured time, which can be noisy and chaotic in some situations, may be difficult to deal with. This is because it's difficult for them to predict what will happen and how they are expected to behave. So you may find that behavioral difficulties in your spouse occur more in transition times. So these are some of the traits of the disorder that look like insensitivity, selfishness, disengagement, and even narcissism. So you can think of ASD, and you should think of ASD as a disorder where the individual has an emotional skills deficit. And this causes a problem for the NT wife, the neurotypical wife. So if you are married to somebody who is autistic or has Asperger's syndrome, same thing, then you're with somebody who does not need to have ongoing deep emotional connection like you do. You, the NT wife, you have to have that. It's a requirement. It's not a luxury or a bonus. You have to have that in order to be mentally and physically healthy. Your autistic husband does not have to have ongoing deep emotional connection. He could go all year and not talk about feelings. He could go an entire lifetime and not cry. The reason I'm bringing this up is because I want you to understand that if you don't have a particular asset or a particular skill, then you don't need to engage in that particular activity associated with that skill. For example, I don't have wings and I can't fly, and it doesn't matter because I can walk, jog, run, ride a motorcycle, ride a bike, ride a car. I've got other ways to get around. But if I had wings, I was born with wings, I was wired to fly, and for whatever reason I can't fly, I can't live up to my potential. I can't use the thing that I was designed to use, and I'm going to suffer as a result. I'm somebody with wings and I can't fly. That's going to be depressing. It's going to cause a large amount of mental and physical problems for me because I'm not living up to my potential. I'm not using the thing that I was born to do. That's the NT wife. She was born to have emotional connection. She's a caretaker, she's a nurturer, she's empathic, she's intuitive. And if she can't use that ability and that skill with her, in this case, autistic husband, she's not living up to her potential. She's not living the way that she was designed to live. And that's why there is so much suffering for the NT wife, not so much for the ASD husband. First one, she states, how can I better understand my husband's emotional responses and what he might be feeling in different situations? Okay, well, if he has ASD, he's going to have some emotions blindness. He's going to be out of touch with his feelings and other people's feelings. And also his display of emotions will be muted, with the exception of anger. If he's sad, you may not know the difference between when he's sad, happy, surprised, but if you notice that he's angry, you'll know what's going on is anxiety. So there's anxiety that displays as anger, and pretty much all other emotions are muted, and it's just your best guess as to what he might be feeling. So to help you better understand his emotions, just know that he's not going to display emotions to the degree that you're going to be able to read. And you said, how can I better understand what he might be feeling in different situations? Again, I would go for the thoughts instead of the feelings. If you get the sense that he's feeling something that's off and is disconcerting to you, instead of asking him how he feels, I would just say, I'm not accusing you of being angry or anxious. It's my download. It appears to me that you might be agitated. I don't know. Is there something on your mind? So you're coming at it from a thought angle, because he'll know probably what he's thinking in the moment, not so much what he's feeling. Okay. The next question, what are some effective strategies for initiating conversations about emotions with my husband? I'm not sure he's going to want to have conversations about emotions. In fact, I'm pretty sure he won't. My question to you is, why do you want to initiate conversations about emotions? We're back to the same thing of emotions blindness. It's hard for him to even understand fully what he's feeling or what you're feeling, let alone have a conversation about it. So this is almost a repeat of my last answer. I would come at it from the angle of thoughts. What are some effective strategies for initiating conversations about thoughts that are related to fears? So if we're talking about problem solving, relationship difficulties, the problems are arising because he's got some fear going on behind the curtain. So let's talk about some of the fears that we have, some of the areas where we feel unsafe in the relationship. So again, you're kind of coming at it from a cerebral point of view rather than an emotional point of view. The next one, is there a way to create a safe space for him to express his feelings without feeling overwhelmed? This is all going to be about the emotions, isn't it? Create a safe space for him. You don't need to create a safe space for him. He'll create his own safe space. He's very self-sufficient, autonomous. He will go over there and engage in his special interests and de-escalate. And then when he's de-escalated and calm, then maybe ask him, is there anything that we want to discuss in the way of when we feel overwhelmed or we feel fearful at some level. So again, come at it from the angle of looking at the thoughts, and specifically thoughts of fear and feeling unsafe and so on. How can I encourage, the next one, how can I encourage my husband to engage more in emotional discussions? Same answer. What signs should I look for that indicate my husband is feeling something, even if he's not expressing it? I wouldn't want you to go on the hunt for speculating what he might be feeling. Again, if he is not expressing it verbally, come at it from the angle of a thought. Let's say that you think that he's feeling a particular way. I'll say apprehensive. You're very intuitive. You see, he seems to be worried about something. So again, come at it from the angle of a thought. Hey, I'm not accusing you of being apprehensive. It's just my intuition and my ability to read body language, and it seems like you might be a little apprehensive about something. And then he might say, well, yeah, you know what, I'm kind of dreading the job interview in the morning. I'm just making that up as an example. And so, yeah, maybe has a job interview the next morning in this example, and he's kind of not too sure of himself and how he's going to be able to pull that off. And so now you know what he's feeling. He's feeling a little sense of dread. The next one, are there specific communication techniques that work best with someone on the autism spectrum? I would be very concrete and specific. I'm assuming this is the NT wife, having a conversation with him. I wouldn't speak a whole lot about emotions and feelings. I would keep it to, you notice a theme here with the answers to all these questions. I would keep it to, and as much as the NT wife is going to hate this, as much as you can, keep it to about tasks. I'm not saying necessarily facts, figures, numbers, and graphs, but keep it about things that are observable. You're very intuitive and you can see, even though it's invisible, how somebody might be feeling. He doesn't have that ability, but you can see somebody mowing the grass. So think in terms of, how can I talk to him in a way that he will be able to visualize what I'm talking about? Because he is a visual thinker, he's a visual learner in a verbal world. So as you're trying to dialogue with him, if you can create imagery, and if you're trying to convey a concern on your part, think in terms of how can I paint a picture for this guy? The next one, how can I support my husband in feeling more connected without pushing him too hard? I would ask him, how to help him feel more connected. I don't know what that looks like to him. So ask him the question. This is you talking to your husband. Hey, if I were to video record you feeling more connected without me pushing you too hard, what exactly could I be doing? Let me repeat that. How can I support my husband in feeling more connected without pushing him too hard? Okay, asking, hey, if I were to video record me helping you to feel more connected and not pushing you too hard, what would I be doing or saying, or what would I be avoiding doing or saying? Okay. Next one, what role does routine play in his emotional stability, and how can I help maintain that? I would ask you to get out of the business of trying to help with him. I mean, your heart's in the right place, God bless you. But your help, I don't think he's going to download it as helpful. In fact, he might download it as criticism. But with respect to what role does routine play, that is his emotional stability. His routine, you say, what role does it play? It's the only role that it plays. Routine is the role in his emotional stability. His routine, his structure, that's where he feels safe. That's where he feels calm. And so that's why he can come off as very stubborn and one-track mind and rigid, because he insists on routine, because that is his emotional stability. The next one, how can I cope with my feelings of loneliness when he seems emotionally distant? So you're saying that he seems emotionally distant. Ask him for his definition of that. Hey, what's your definition of emotional distance? And let him say, if he can come up with the answer, so you'll know what his definition is of being emotionally distant. But with respect to how can you cope with your feelings of loneliness, I would say, I would put it in the form of a request for him to help you feel less lonely. So this is you talking to your husband. If I were to video record you helping me feel less lonely when I download your actions as being emotionally distant, I'm not accusing you of being emotionally distant, but sometimes I download it that way and I feel lonely. And just in case you would want to help me with that, if I were to video record you helping me in those moments of loneliness, you would be saying or doing some of these things. We're back to tasks. He can understand tasks. Give him something very concrete. You would say, you would come over and give me a hug and a kiss on the cheek and say, it's going to be okay, I'm here for you. Something like that. And we'll tackle one more here. What are some ways to celebrate small emotional breakthroughs when they happen? I would celebrate any successes, not just emotional breakthroughs. Anything that remotely falls into the area of I appreciate that, then you should instantly, I'm not saying bring out cake, clowns, and balloons, but if there's an emotional breakthrough, if there's a task that you've wanted him to do for how many weeks or months and he finally followed through with it, if there was a discussion that would have turned into a fight or an argument, but last night it did not, I would point out to him, make a concerted effort to point out to him whenever he's doing anything right, including emotional breakthroughs. Most guys on the autism spectrum feel like they've failed. They feel like there's always letting her down, never can live up to expectations. They feel very defeated. But you have the power to boost that low self-esteem, and it doesn't take much. I'm not talking about compliments. Well, I like your cologne smells really good. No, hey, I appreciate the fact that you help the children with their homework. That's a big deal to me. Thank you. One sentence, two sentences. So let's don't talk about celebrate. We're talking about simply pointing out with a sentence or two, some words of appreciation will be huge, huge. Okay. So if you have any questions on the NT wives now, have any questions about how to deal with your ASD husband, or it can be the inverse, maybe an NT husband wants to know how to deal with the ASD wife, then feel free to ask your question in the comments below this video.
You look normal, you walk normal, you talk normal, you might be the smartest guy at work. People that you run into at the grocery store or here and there, you pass as a neurotypical to them. But you're at your weakest with her. We've discussed that. Because there's a lot of emotional and social nuances and requirements that you're not up to speed with. And she thinks, how come he can do so well everywhere else? We go over to the friends, he does fine. Work, he does fine. We go over here and do this, and he's fine. He gets along good with these people, gets along great with the neighbors. Smartest guy at work. When it comes to me, suddenly he just doesn't care. He's uncaring, insensitive, narcissistic, sociopathic, Lord only knows what else. So, and I'm not faulting her. You look so goddamn normal and act, talk, walk, work so normal on all other levels except her, with her. And she doesn't get that. Now, a lot of them do, especially if she's doing my NT ladies group, or you and her are doing the couples group, or she's been watching my videos. She's starting to learn that her message delivery, her heart was in the right place. She had good intentions. She cares about the relationship. Nagging equals importance, but her message delivery sucked. It sucked. It raised your anxiety. You couldn't even listen. She probably came at you when she was upset. She probably droned on for too long. She probably addressed 15 topics in one conversation. She probably brought up the past, threw it in your face. She probably throwing words at you like darts on your forehead. And you could only listen to 80% of that. And of that 80, you could only understand 60%. And of that 60, you could only retain 40%. And of that 40%, you only follow through with 20%. Not because you're insensitive, uncaring, and selfish. Your brain, your prefrontal cortex was shutting down. And your amygdala was in charge. The question is, do you have any tactics for me to practice to be more in tune with her or more present to anticipate her needs and wants? I always feel like I'm on high alert and trying to be perceptive, but I seem to always get blindsided by things like this. Well, if she is wanting you to be more in tune and anticipate her wants and needs, then she hasn't been watching any of my videos, because at the risk of sounding sarcastic, that's an unreasonable expectation, because one of the things that comes with ASD level 1, 2 and 3 too, is due to mind blindness, alexithymia, executive function deficits, and anxiety, the person on the autism spectrum has a hard time predicting outcomes. Okay, so with things that involve social and emotional nuances and social skills, in this case, he will have a hard time predicting outcomes and predicting the possible likely future. See, you can predict that tomorrow morning the sun's going to come up. But your NT wife with high in social and emotional intelligence, she can predict what so-and-so is going to say in response to what she is going to say. She already knows how this person is going to respond and almost nails it ahead of time. So you're not going to be able to, quote, anticipate her needs or wants. So your wife, she needs to tell you what she needs and wants instead of making you guess.
I want to talk about the secret meaning behind I love you when said by your ASD husband. If you're in a relationship with an autistic person, you may have asked yourself this question: does he really love me, or is he just saying the words? Or the opposite, why doesn't he ever say I love you, even though he stays and shows up and seems to be committed? So today we're going to talk about something that's rarely explained clearly and almost never explained compassionately. What I love you actually means when it comes from an autistic person. And I want to say this right up front. This video is not about excusing emotional neglect. It's not about lowering your standards as an NT wife. And it's not about telling you to accept less than you deserve. This is about translation, because an autistic person speaks love in a different emotional language, and most NT partners were never given the dictionary. So let's talk about why I love you is harder than it looks. For many autistic adults, the phrase I love you is not casual language. It's a social reflex. It's a romantic performance. It's not something you say because the moment expects it. Instead, it's treated like a statement of fact. And facts, to an autistic mind, are dangerous if they're not absolutely true. So when an autistic person says, I love you, they're often thinking, do I mean this literally? Is this stable and consistent over time? Am I committing myself permanently by saying this? What obligations am I now taking on? That's a lot of weight for 3 words, which is why some autistic people say it very late, say it very rarely, or say it once and assume it stands forever. To them, Repeating it can feel redundant or even dishonest if nothing has changed in the relationship. So let's talk about why they say it once and never again. This is where many NT partners get hurt. You may remember the moment very clearly. He said, I love you. You felt hope, relief, connection, and then silence. No repetition, no reinforcement, no emotional follow-up. And you start thinking, did it stop? Did I imagine it? Why won't he say it again? Okay, so here's the translation that's rarely offered. Most autistic people believe that once something is stated as true, it remains true unless explicitly revoked. In their mind, saying it again doesn't increase the truth. Saying it often doesn't deepen the meaning. Saying it emotionally doesn't make it more accurate. They believe their presence, their routine, their loyalty, or their consistency is the real proof. Unfortunately, that doesn't meet most neurotypical emotional needs, and that mismatch can create profound loneliness in the relationship. Now let's talk about when I love you means I'm safe with you. Here's something most neurotypicals don't realize. For an autistic person, love is often less about emotion and more about safety. So when they say I love you, what they're really saying is, you're predictable. You're not overwhelming. You don't force me to perform. I can unmask around you. I don't have to constantly defend myself with you. That may not be poetic, but it's profound. To an autistic nervous system, safety is intimacy. And choosing someone as a safe person is not casual, it's rare. They have often not been safe in times past. Now, let's talk about why I love you often lacks emotion or warmth. Many NTYs say, well, he says I love you, but it feels flat. This isn't indifference, it's neurology. Autistic people often experience alexithymia, which is difficulty identifying or expressing emotions, emotional intensity without emotional language, shut down under emotional pressure, and fear of saying something wrong. So when they say I love you, it may come out monotone, brief, unembellished, boring, robotic, and even without eye contact. Not because their love is weak, but because expressing emotion and feeling emotion are two different processes. One can be present while the other struggles. Now let's talk about when I love you is shown but not spoken. Many autistic spouses communicate love through actions, not words. So you as the NT might notice things like, he stays when it's hard, he doesn't cheat, he keeps routine stable, he fixes problems quietly, he shows loyalty without drama, he seems committed long term. To the autistic person, all those things are love. But here's the hard truth I need to say clearly. Consistency is not the same as emotional connection. Reliability is not the same as emotional attunement. And commitment alone does not meet relational needs. So understanding autistic love should never mean silencing your own. Now let's talk about what I love you does not automatically mean. This part matters. When an autistic partner says, I love you, it does not automatically mean they know how to meet your emotional needs. They understand emotional reciprocity. They recognize emotional neglect. They will intuit your inner world, and they can express love in ways you need without guidance. Love does not equal skill, and love does not replace relationship work. So now let's talk about what healthy translation looks like. A healthy relationship doesn't rely on guessing. It relies on explicit translation. That may sound like, when you say I love you, this is what it means to you. When I don't hear it or feel warmth, this is what happens inside me. Here are the behaviors that help me feel loved. Here is what is unrealistic for me to expect you to intuit. So love across neurotypes requires clarity, not assumption. So here's the big takeaway I want you to leave with. When an autistic person says I love you, it often means I have chosen you, I feel safe with you, I am committed to you, and I am not leaving you. But if you are starving emotionally, that still doesn't matter much. Understanding the meaning of their love does not mean ignoring your own needs, but both truths can coexist. And if this video helped put language to something you felt but couldn't explain, you're not alone. Please like, subscribe, and share this with someone who's trying to understand a neurodiverse relationship more clearly. And remember, love isn't just about intention, it's about impact. We have a question from an NT wife. She says, my husband either is a narcissist or has autism spectrum disorder, or it might be something else. I don't know. How am I supposed to know? Well, people with ASD level 1, which is high function autism, experience a lot of different difficulties, and not to complicate the situation, but many of these difficulties are associated with other things. There's a huge crossover between narcissistic personality disorder and ASD. The same thing could be said with obsessive compulsive disorder. So it's kind of hard to just guess. It would be best to go get a diagnosis if he were to be willing to get an assessment. But ultimately, ASD is hard to diagnose and is frequently misdiagnosed. So some of the things to look for if he does indeed have ASD level 1 would be cognitive difficulties. Frequently, the person on the spectrum experiences difficulty with empathizing with others and may say inappropriate things because he fails to consider others' feelings. A significant problem for the person on the spectrum is mind blindness. And mind blindness occurs when he is unable to make inferences about what others are thinking, and it also hinders communication with others. Another thing that you will find if he does indeed have ASD level 1 will be a narrow range of interests. If the individual on the spectrum seems stuck on a certain topic and seems a bit obsessed and seems to always be talking about that topic, he demonstrates narrow interests, and this is a trait of ASD. And it's not uncommon for the person on the spectrum to learn everything he can about this special interest, and then he may feel compelled to share information about that topic with everyone around him. He may even interrupt when somebody else is speaking so he can switch back to his favorite topic, which is his special interest. And obviously, focusing on narrow interests affects social interactions negatively. Another thing that will come with the package of ASD level 1 would be difficulty with social interaction. So although the autistic person may want to interact with others, he lacks the social skills to get it done effectively. The person may fail to understand both verbal and nonverbal cues, and communication with others can break down as a result. The ASD individual may lecture others, he may fail to ask questions to continue a discussion, or simply not even acknowledge the other person by looking at them. The desire to communicate may be there, but the language abilities others seem to develop naturally just don't develop easily for the person on the spectrum. Another thing that will tend to come with the package would be motor clumsiness, sensory sensitivity, the need for routine. People on the autism spectrum crave structure. They thrive on routine because things that show up in an impromptu fashion throws them off. They don't like change and they don't like surprise change. Some other things that would come with ASD level 1 would be having a high level of vocabulary and formal speech patterns, peculiarities in speech and language, such as lack of rhythm, odd inflections, or in monotone, taking figures of speech literally, downloading even neutral comments as offensive and as a personal attack. So if most, if not all of that sounds familiar, then we're probably talking ASD level 1. If most of that does not really fit your husband, then it's probably something else.
I think this is probably the case a good 80% of the time. He, in this case, your husband, it's very likely, and you can pick his brain to verify this if you want. It's very likely that he knew something was off as a child. And it's very likely that to one degree or another, he got ostracized, teased, bullied, couldn't quite fit in. He wanted to fit in. Most autistic people, kids, we're talking about kids now, they want to fit in. And some of them learn to mask and do fit in. But that's very anxiety provoking and it's exhausting and it's a rough way to live. Others have tried to fit in and they couldn't fit in and they just say, fuck it. And they just become an independent person, become very autonomous and get engrossed in their special activity and their games and their video games and whatnot, and totally detached from everybody. And then others want to fit in and keep trying to fit in even as adults and have made peace with the fact that, and the people that know him well have made peace with the fact that he's just an oddball, he's just kind of weird, and he's going to say stuff that is going to be kind of rude and inappropriate from time to time, but he just goes ahead and trips along through life and tries to fit in, and he knows he's awkward socially and honestly doesn't really care. So anyway, as a child, this person grows up, probably was classified as a problem child by his parents, probably classified at some degree as a problem student by teachers, and so he quickly was on the receiving end of so much disapproval that his self-worth tanked, basically went to the toilet. And so now we fast forward to today, and if you have said some totally neutral things to him, or if you have offered some what you thought was constructive criticism, and certainly when you've delivered some full-blown criticism, he already has low self-worth. And so when you say anything that he downloads as critical, he views that as a threat to his already small sense of self-worth. And then, as you have probably experienced many times, you get an overreaction. It's like, if there was an objective third party watching the two of you conversing, and this objective third party heard your comment, he or she would probably say, yeah, that was totally 100% neutral. There wasn't an ounce of criticism or cynicism or sarcasm in there, but he still downloaded his criticism. It's because he's hypersensitive due to low self-worth. He's always on alert for threats to his already low self-worth. And I like to use the analogy of a sunburn. Let's say, for example, you went to the beach, you weren't necessarily prepared, you were out there all day, you thought you were fine. The next day, or even through the night, you realize you have a terrible sunburn. Maybe even, second-degree burns, super, super red, super, super sore. And somebody comes along and taps you on the shoulder because they want to get your attention, and you, God damn, whoa, what? And you're like shocked at this severe overreaction, caught you by surprise. And he tells you, well, I've got this sunburn, and serious sunburn, and all it did was all you had to do was one little touch. And this person with the sunburn severely overreacted. And that's the same thing that happens with your neutral comments. It's just a light touch. But he's someone with a severe sunburn, severe low self-worth. So it only takes a little hint of a download that you're a threat. Just a hint, a pinch, a touch. And boom, he's in fight or flight mode instantly. And now you're on the receiving end of a meltdown or a shutdown. Sounds a bit melodramatic and exaggeratory, perhaps. Not in most cases. Now, I'm not saying, the reason I wanted to tell you all that is because I wanted you to feel sorry for him or let him off the hook. No, he's very much on the hook, whether he wants to be or you want him to be or not. But it might be appropriate in the cases that you recognize this hypersensitivity due to his self-worth being in the toilet, to maybe in those moments, if you're so inclined, to extend a little grace and mercy. But I just want you to let you know that a good 80% plus, he has wounded child issues that haunt him today. You would want to go back and do some childhood repair. You would want to look at the abuse that happened. You would want to look at the subsequent faulty belief systems that occurred due to the abuse. You would want to look at the thinking errors that resulted from the faulty belief systems. You would want to look for the negative emotions and negative behavior that resulted from the thinking errors. So you have to kind of reverse engineer and go way back to childhood and do some childhood repair stuff. And then now you have a good therapist would actually rewire his brain in the fullest sense of the phrase, because he would get some insight in the brain. There's some neuroplasticity. So with this new insight for him, then he would get some other neural pathways that might help come up with some better belief systems, some better ways to process things, which would result in less toxic emotions, and the final step that you want to see, less problematic behavior.
Now let's have a little talk about understanding the misconceptions. In other words, assessments that you make of your spouse. And we're going to put this in the context of the neurodiverse marriage, where one person is autistic, the other one is not. So in any relationship, let alone a neurodiverse relationship, communication and understanding are essential components that contribute to the bond shared between partners. However, it's not uncommon for individuals to develop inaccurate assessments of their spouses, often leading to misunderstandings and conflict. How many times has that happened? I think it goes without saying that recognizing and addressing these misconceptions can significantly enhance the quality of your perhaps now deteriorating marriage. Our perceptions of others, including our spouses, are often colored by our experiences, biases, and expectations. So it is critical to understand that individuals may view the same situation through different lenses. Your ASD spouse is going to see things through his filter. You're going to see a different set of things through your filter. For example, if one partner tends to focus on negative aspects, they may develop a skewed view of their spouse's character or intentions. And this misperception will create an emotional distance that is difficult to bridge. Now I want to look at 3 common misconceptions. Number 1, assuming intentions. One significant pitfall is assuming that we know what our partner is thinking or intending. Instead of openly communicating, you may jump to conclusions based on limited information, leading to unfounded judgments about your spouse's motives. Number 2, overgeneralization. Many people tend to generalize from a single event or a few instances. For example, if your spouse forgot an important date, you might start labeling them as inconsiderate or forgetful while disregarding their many positive qualities or actions. Third and final, ignoring the context. Life circumstances can heavily influence behavior. Stress at work, health issues, family concerns, etc. will affect how one behaves at home. And failing to consider these contextual factors will result in unfair assessments. Hey, this is Mark Hutten. Would you like to schedule a one-on-one Zoom call? Okay, it's so simple. Just look under any of my videos in the description area. Click on this Calendly link. Now you see my calendar. Pick your month, your day, anytime that's available. Enter your name and email address. Then you'll get a follow-up email with the Zoom link on the day and time that you picked. And voila, we will talk.